Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your welcoming. I'm delighted really to be here today at the Aoyama Gakuen University. It's a great pleasure to be in front of you, to be able to speak about this organization in which I've been working for a bit of time now. And it's always a great pleasure and a very useful moment to be able to go out of my usual official meetings to be able to speak with you guys who would be really the future of all of us. So I'm looking forward to presenting the organization and what it does, but I'm also looking forward to having your questions and to the discussion we might have on these very important issues that UNESCO is about. So UNESCO is a famous name, often associated with the most magnificent examples of world heritage. And well, Japan is home of many of them, 25 in total, from ancient Nara to Mount Fuji, 25 names and sites that I'm sure you all know quite well. But while UNESCO is famous for that, and most people know it for this part, for the World Heritage, the breadth of UNESCO's mandate, the extent of its action, is not very well known. Even if UNESCO has particularly strong ties with Japanese youth, with over 1,000 UNESCO-associated schools, the largest national network in the world, I'm sure you will be surprised by what I will present to you and the scope and coherence of the organization's work. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. First of all, a bit of history. UNESCO was born in the ashes of the Second World War. It's one of the organizations within the UN system. It is an agency, which means that basically it functions while being in the UN system. It functions independently. For instance, to give you a very clear examples, the number of member states at UNESCO is not the same as the number of member states in the UN. So some are even member of the UN, not member of UNESCO. Some are members of UNESCO, not member of the UN. So it's a bit complicated, but that's what agencies are about. It's different than the UN as such in New York. For instance, the Director General of UNESCO is elected by member states, and UNESCO has its own what we call governing bodies. So it's a bit independent from the UN in New York. And to give you the main idea, and if you need to remember one sentence of today, I would suggest this one would be the one. And it's a sentence that is in the UNESCO Constitution, and that to me explains the mandate. I mean, I really think a lot about this sentence, and you will see why. So this sentence that is the basis of the mandate of UNESCO is the following: since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. I can repeat it because it's a beautiful one. Since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. It's a beautiful and powerful sentence, and you will see that it encompasses the mandate of UNESCO and that it was relevant in 1945, and it's even more relevant today. We'll speak about that. And because of this focus in mind, UNESCO's mandate brings together issues as diverse as education, science, culture, information. If you think about the sentence, you will see that there is a logic in there. So we will speak about that, and all along the presentation, there will be also another paradox that I want you to think about and maybe to discuss afterwards, is that while the main contemporary challenges, climate change, digital, I mean, just to cite a few, are more and more global. I mean, it's obvious that it's complicated to control climate change while remaining only in national borders. So that's something that is obvious for all of us, and in particular for young people. Well, and therefore, multilateralism, or let's say global solidarity, should be obvious and that it has a relevant answer. Well, today, more and more multilateralism is contested, discussed, and put into question. So we need to think about this paradox in our discussion and see how we could maybe go beyond this paradox and move forward. So I will start first in the first part a bit descriptive about what the mandate of UNESCO is and what we are doing in the different fields. And the first field, the biggest one at UNESCO, almost half of the budget of UNESCO, a budget that is not huge. It's about it's biennial budget of $1.3 billion. So half of this is put into one issue, which is education. And it's obvious one. So the first field, education, and the main aim, ensure that it is accessible to everyone all lifelong. Why? Because education is the cornerstone of all of our efforts. It's a fundamental right, first thing. It is a pillar for development. Just to give you some numbers, for example, our most recent projections show that this generation of students risks losing $21 trillion in potential lifetime earnings, or the equivalent of 17% of today's global GDP, due to the learning losses caused by COVID school closures. Just an example to show how education can impact, or lack of education can impact development and economic growth. And finally, so a right, pillar for development, and essential, of course, to understanding and tackling contemporary challenges. Over the past 75 years, UNESCO has become a forum where the international community comes together to establish common ambitions in the education field. And let me give you just briefly some examples. First one, let's say the global one on education, defending the fundamental right to education. So what we do is that we are working to ensure that the fundamental right to education, proclaimed by Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is a reality for everyone. The world has made great strides in this area. 400 million children were deprived of school in 2000. 20 years later, this figure has decreased by 40%, 50. 244 million children will be out of school this year, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is why Africa is one of our global priorities on this field, along with gender equality. So in UNESCO, there are two global priorities, Africa and gender equality. For we know that girls, unfortunately, are the first to be affected by school dropouts. UNESCO has launched, to give you an example, because always the question is, but what do we do about it? So we had launched a major program in Africa to fight against the first cause of school dropouts amongst girls, which are unwanted early pregnancies. This is the goal of our rights, our lives, our future reproductive health education programs. It operates in 31 sub-Saharan African countries and has reached 30 million learners with HIV and sexuality education since 2018, building knowledge and skills for gender equality and healthy lives. And through this activity that addresses the structural cause of school dropout, millions of lives have changed. The second big challenge on education, or big objective on education, is mobilizing the international community to make and keep educational commitments. As the lead United Nations Agency for Education, as you may know, we have these goals, these development goals in the world that were fixed by the UN. And the number 4, the SDG 4, as we call them, is education. So UNESCO has been assigned the mission to be the guardian of this SDG. So that's what I mean when I say as the lead United Nations Agency for Education. UNESCO mobilizes the international community and governments to make serious and concrete commitments to education, and we follow up on them. There's a real need, according to UNESCO, if countries do not take additional measures, only 1 in 6 countries will meet the SDG 4 and achieve universal access to quality education by 2030. There will still be an estimated 84 million children and young people out of school by the end of the decade. I'm sorry to give you many numbers, but I think it's important to see the facts of what we speak, which sometimes can be a bit conceptual. So to do that, to galvanize international commitments to education, UNESCO played a key role in preparation for the Transforming Education Summit that took place in September in New York. Under the auspices of UNESCO, we have now the high-level steering committee on education, which is responsible of following up, meaning taking the countries accountable to present what they did on education. And the last example, objective I wanted to put forward is the issue of reinventing the future of education. To face today's challenges, war, inequality, climate change, digital technologies, we all understand that we must not only have more people attending or having education, but also transform education itself, make it more relevant to the needs of the world and to the needs of the younger generations. According to a study published by UNESCO last year, only 1/3 of teachers are really trained to address the challenges of the future, and in particular, the challenge of nature and environment. Biodiversity loss is only mentioned in 1 in 5 school programs. So UNESCO is the place for this conversation. And we launched a global consultation of governments, teachers, students to determine what kind of education we need in the future. And this gave, the result was a report, quite an important one that you can find online. Basically, everything I say you can find online on the site of UNESCO. And this report was called the Report on the Futures of Education, and it came out in 2021. The second, so education, big chunk, of course, 50%. We will come back to that later. The second sector, as we call it at UNESCO, that is in our activity is culture. Culture meaning culture and heritage all together. Why is it important? Because we believe that culture and cultural diversity are a source of richness for all humanity. Heritage creates emotional connections within and across borders. We always tend to say heritage is what unites people, and sometimes, unfortunately, what makes them fight too. So heritage is important, and that's what UNESCO is following so closely. As such, heritage fosters mutual understanding and respect, and therefore peace. So this revolutionary idea that humanity has a shared heritage and a shared responsibility to preserve it is enshrined on the 1972 World Heritage Convention. This convention is a convention that basically aims at protecting heritage and creates the famous list of the World Heritage that I spoke about at the beginning. Over the past 50 years, this idea has become universal, creating a new space for diplomacy and dialogue between nations. I will give you just a few examples. The first one, protecting heritage, and I will start with the World Heritage as such. World Heritage sites are those that present an outstanding universal value to humanity. Oftentimes we will think, why is this on the list? Why is that not on the list? So the way to be on the list is that nations present candidatures, and the criteria is an outstanding universal value that can be defined by different ways, but this place has to have an outstanding universal value to humanity. Currently, UNESCO's World Heritage List includes 1,154 properties in 167 countries, including 43 transboundary sites. So the point of this convention is to protect this heritage. That's one thing, and countries are committed to protect it. I will come back to it when we'll speak about situation of conflict, like Ukraine, for instance. And the second thing that UNESCO is doing, except being the guardian of this convention, is also launching big campaigns like the one in the 60s in Nubia, which allowed to save incredible temples in this part of southern Egypt. However, for this heritage to be effective, it must be also representative of all humanity. Everyone must be able to identify with it. And this is especially an issue for African World Heritage. Currently, just over 10% of all sites are on the African continent. That's not enough, and we need to work a lot on this. This year was the 50th anniversary of the convention, and we determined that this issue of African representation, as well as the climate change, were the two big challenges facing the World Heritage these days. Another part of the heritage, less famous, but more and more actually famous, is the issue of intangible heritage. And we have another convention, which is the 2003 Intangible Heritage Convention. Recognizing that diversity is a source of richness for humanity as a whole is also the idea behind this convention. Why? Because many traditions also represent heritage and unite people the same way I said that it's not only pyramids or also traditions sometimes can be very important to unite people and to represent heritage. Finally, last point on protecting heritage is the fight against illicit trafficking. Another way for UNESCO to preserve heritage. And here again, we have a convention, so this legal international instruments, the 1970 Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership for cultural property. So it provides member states with a common benchmark for action to combat trafficking, but also for making restitution. It has been ratified by 142 states, and with our partners, so the implementation, we have trained thousands of police officers, art and museum professionals on these issues, including Interpol, the World Customs Organization, and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. We have also developed a code of ethics for dealers in cultural property and professionals. So that was the first part in the culture sector, that is, of course, very famous and important, the heritage. The second part, which is also very important for us, is supporting cultural diversity. Of course, through supporting cultural and creative industries. Here too, we have a convention, the 2005 Convention on Cultural Diversity, that is an international milestone in cultural policies, and that is also very, very important. We are very committed to supporting this diversity of cultural expressions in music, in fashion, in cinema, in design, in all artistic and creative industries through a range of programs. For instance, just to give you a Japanese example, for instance, with Naomi Kawase, who is a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Culture and Creative Industries, we have launched the UNESCO Nara Residency to support African women filmmakers and ensure the voices are heard. So that was the second big chunk, which was culture. The third one I want to mention is natural sciences and the ocean. Why? Where we believe we can only address contemporary environmental and societal challenges by building sustainable learning societies. In this context, advances in science, technology, innovations are essential. UNESCO, therefore, supports scientific cooperation in all fields. So first of them, obvious, is advancing international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. So basically, UNESCO has supported member states in developing their capacities, policies, and access to scientific and technological achievements. To give you an example, before the pandemic, only a quarter of all academic publications were open access. We have been pushing a lot for what we call open science, and things are moving forward in this field. UNESCO works to open up science to all of society. This means ensuring free access to academic publications, also means making the entire scientific process accessible, and it means taking science beyond the scientific community. And to do that, again, a legal instrument, it's a very important recommendation on open science that was adopted in November 2021. And it's really important on this issue of open science. Second part, reforging the relationship between people and the planet. What does that mean? Climate change is another contemporary challenge that UNESCO is addressing. So for climate change goes hand in hand with another equally urgent crisis, which is the collapse of biodiversity. In the history of our planet, never has life collapsed so quickly, as explained by all the scientific working on this issue. Humanity has already altered 3/4 of the terrestrial environment and 2/3 of the marine environment, just to give you an example. 1 million of the world's 8 million species are threatened with extinction. Therefore, what UNESCO does is protecting ecosystems. How? 6% now of the world's land mass is protected by ecosystems of UNESCO. Is the equivalent of the surface area of China, through 738 UNESCO biosphere reserves in 134 countries, through 177 global geoparks, UNESCO global geoparks, and 218 natural world heritage sites. That's a very important part of UNESCO that is not very known when we speak about UNESCO. Another program that is not very known, I'm pretty sure you don't, guys. UNESCO ensures the ocean is included in international efforts through what we call the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. It is the commission in the world that is really in charge of academic research on the oceans. We also host the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, and we are the lead for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. And finally, on the issue of science, we work and we have the lead with Japan as the main partner on this issue on preventing disaster risks. One example of what we do is our Tsunami Ready initiatives, which basically aims to ensure that 100% of coastal communities are trained to react to tsunami warnings by 2030. And as I said, Japan is a key ally on this issue. Another sector, and we have one more to go after this one on the description, is the sector of social and human sciences. UNESCO has been famous for a long time for having fought and having been at the forefront of defining the issue of racism. Indeed, fighting racism and discrimination remains a key issue for us, and we have programs on all aspects on this issue. One way to do that, just to give you one example, was to create and to publish the first general history of Africa, which was the first book of this kind really done by African historians. So it's basically tabling on the power of history and of a new way to present it to fight racism. So this general history of Africa, it's big books, quite impressive. We're trying now to basically fuel it in the curricula and have this history of Africa taught in the classrooms in Africa, but also everywhere in the world. And finally, last part of the work of UNESCO it's the information. Protection of journalists is a big issue for us. We raise awareness about that by condemning and monitoring of judicial follow-up for every journalist killed worldwide. So unfortunately, one part of my work and our work is to, every time a journalist is killed, to react to that. and we report, and so we monitor the killings and also the facts of violence against journalists. We do support countries to develop protection mechanisms everywhere in the world. I could give you an example in Somalia, where we have a very strong program in this very complicated country. We train judiciary and security forces to be able to protect better journalists, and we support journalists at risk or covering conflict. This is the case, for instance, now in Ukraine, where we provided 125 bulletproof vests and helmets and strengthened the 24-hour helpline for journalists who are working in this very, very difficult environment. So one part of this sector of information is protection of journalists. Another part is improving access to reliable information in the digital age. And this is coming back to education, coming back to the first sentence I was mentioning, the sentence of the it's in the minds of people that we have to create the barriers against war. Why? Because this is also linked to education. It means that in the age of digital area, in the age where information is not only what you have in the classrooms or at the university, but it's of course what we read on internet. The way to go and search the information needs to be taught more, better in our schools, and this is another part of the work of UNESCO that we try to do through what we call media and information literacy. So this, I'm sorry that it was a bit a descriptive part, but I think it was needed for you to have the general overview of the work of UNESCO, and I need to check if I don't speak too much. No, I'm okay. Now that you have this general overview, I would like to have a more dynamic presentation on where we are today and what are the challenges, the issues around UNESCO. And okay, I'm a bit biased probably, but the description I want to do is a description of hope of an organization that in a very adverse situation, and to say things very clearly, 5 years ago, it was an organization that was in a very, very difficult situation, with the US announcing that they would leave it, which they did, because the US is not a member of the organization anymore, with countries very, very unhappy with, for different reasons, political, management, etc., who were not hesitating to pay their dues, including Japan, including the United Kingdom. So an organization attacked, under attack, in a context that we know of a very difficult multilateral environment in which multilateralism itself is attacked. That was 5 years ago, very complicated. Today, we are in a situation where UNESCO is, I would say, thriving again, with the US contemplating coming back and able soon to come back, because I will speak about it a bit later. An organization that launched flagship programs that are famous worldwide. I will come back to that, with strong initiatives responding to contemporary issues. An organization that had its extra budgetary money increasing by 50% in the last 5 years. So what happened, and that's what I want to try to discuss with you today, and what happened that allowed such a success to happen in such a difficult environment. So what the Director General decided to do when she arrived in this position 5 years ago was first to decide on a few very important strategic objectives that she tackled methodically, and I would like, when I will conclude, to come back to this method, because I think the method is the key to explain the success of this international organization. So the first of these objectives was to tackle the issue of the political tensions that were really impacting, basically killing softly the organization. The US, so the big example of this is what we call the Israel-Palestine issue or the Middle East issue in UNESCO. Basically, UNESCO was famous for its heritage sites and for, that's where Israel and Palestine are fighting all the time, and that's where things are complicated. So UNESCO, like a place where political tensions are very strong. So the Director General, decided to tackle this, and basically what was happening is that the decisions adopted every executive board, which is twice a year on this issue of Israel-Palestine, and in particular UNESCO has a decision every 6 months on the issue of Jerusalem. So you can imagine that this is a very tensed issue. So every 6 months there was a huge fight. There was a decision that was quite aggressive, viewed from the Israeli point of view. That was not enough from the other point of view. Anyway, big fights, votes, and huge tensions. And that was the reason why, at the end of the day, and also because Palestine had become a member state, a full-fledged member state at UNESCO in 2011, that was the main reason why the US decided to leave the organization. So the Director General decided, okay, let's try to have a mediation or to push forward a mediation, and that we could do, us at the Secretariat, between Israelis and, on the other side, Palestinians and Jordanians on the issue of Jerusalem. And somehow, after discussing, after creating a trust environment, we managed to have a text that since 5 years have been consensual, meaning the Israelis and the Palestinians are accepting it. Both of them are not happy with it, but at least they accept it. And therefore, this decision is passed every 6 months by consensus, meaning that nobody votes. Everybody is happy, it passes, and there's no tensions around this issue anymore. So this is a huge achievement that many people thought that it was not possible to achieve, but thanks to the willingness, the courage, and the method used by the Director General of this mediation, worked out for us, and therefore created the conditions for the US to be able to want to come back to UNESCO. We had a big difficulty, which was that there is a law in the US that says that the US cannot finance an organization in which Palestine is a member state. So if they would come without financing, it would be difficult for them to be a full-fledged member. So we needed a waiver in the Congress to basically waive this law. And the great news of the end of the year is that the Congress passed such a waiver on the 23rd of December. And this means that the door is now open for the US to come back whenever they will think it's appropriate, and hopefully sooner than later. So lessening the political tensions was one huge objective, and it was achieved. I just gave you an example. There are other examples that show that this was achieved. Some examples involving the region here. And so that was lessening the political tensions, and also trying to use the power of cultural diplomacy to have even some gains to promote peace and move forward, not only being defensive and stopping political tensions. I would just give you an example, which is not far from here. It's about Korea. On the issue of intangible heritage, the Korean Peninsula, the two countries that form the Korean Peninsula right now, were used to basically put forward one candidature. So I will give you an example, kimchi. So, for instance, South Korea would propose the candidature of kimchi, and immediately after, North Korea would propose the candidature of kimchi. And kimchi would be inscribed twice. So it was a bit strange, but everybody understood it was for the political situation like that. So in 2018, there was, let's say, some try to have a reconciliation or a better situation in the peninsula. So a political environment that was interesting. Both countries had put two candidatures about, so sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly, but the sirum, which is a kind of wrestling in Korea. So we had the idea to basically try to join these candidatures. The South Koreans agreed, and then we led a mediation, again from the Secretariat in North Korea. And finally, the North Koreans agreed too. And this candidature was joined, and Sirum was inscribed by the two countries together in 2018 in the list of intangible heritage. So this wouldn't have happened if the initiative hadn't been taken by the Secretariat, if there hadn't been the courage to try to do this mediation. You will tell me, okay, this is not changing the issue of nuclear weapons in the peninsula, okay. But it is important, and when you speak with the Koreans about this issue of serum, it was something that, at this point of time, played a positive role, even though, of course, it doesn't solve the big issues. So one main objective, first one was to lessen political tension. The other big one was to raise visibility by launching important initiatives, in particular in zone of conflicts or after conflicts. Why? Because it's basically chicken and egg. If we launch big project, then the organization is more visible, then everybody understands why the organization exists, then we are in a better position to fund, to have better funding of the organization. So just to give you one example, Mosul, this city in Iraq that was under the leadership, under the reign of Daesh, the terrorist organization, for very long months, suffered a lot, was basically destroyed. Mosul was a very diverse city with, of course, Muslim present, Christian, different religions, with a lot of cultural diversity. Everything was destroyed. I went there right after the war. It was like every single house was basically destroyed in the old city, including the main cultural landmarks. The Director General again decided to try to launch a really crazy initiative, which was, and the name we gave it was Revive the Spirit of Mosul. So, everything really was destroyed. So it was like, what is she saying? What's that? So we launched this, and basically the idea was to rebuild the cultural heritage and the main cultural buildings in the old city, including the mosque. I don't know if you do remember, but basically the caliphate was proclaimed there with the so-called caliph who had proclaimed it in the mosque in Mosul. So we decided to rebuild this mosque. So basically the terrorist organization proclaimed the caliphate, destroyed the mosque, and we would rebuild it. And also rebuild churches in the old city, and also rebuild traditional houses. So that was one part. The second part was to relaunch cultural life in the city. And the third part was to work on the educational institutions. But of course, you will tell me, okay, well, how do we do that? Where's the money? So we had to raise money. So with this crazy idea, we went to see the Emirates, and the current president of the Emirates, then he was the second in charge, said, okay, we will finance that. So that was the first influx of money that came for this project, about 50 million. And slowly around that, we built a dynamic. And today it's the biggest project of the history of UNESCO with more than $110 million put in that. For the 2-3 first years, we couldn't see what was happening because it takes time to basically demine, protect, etc. But now things are moving, and it's I have to say it's very touching and moving to see slowly the mosque, the churches, the houses in this place that was totally destroyed to revive. The people in the city say that they are proud. The different communities that had left are coming back now thanks to this rehabilitation. So I think this is really a concrete example that we can do things if we do believe in it. So first thing, lessening the political tension. Second, launch big projects that will leave an impact. And lastly, launch projects and work on initiatives on the contemporary issues. You remember the first sentence I said? The first sentence is not just stuck in 45. The first sentence applies to today, where I will give you 2 examples. The first, ethics of AI. So you will tell me what UNESCO ethics of AI, why? So ethics of AI, UNESCO has a mandate on the ethics of science. And we all know that artificial intelligence today comes and raises a lot of questions on the issue of ethics, algorithms, the bias on algorithms, gender bias in algorithms, other kind of bias in algorithms. That's just an example that the developments of AI have an impact on this issue of ethics. So what we did is that we launched a big discussion in the world with all the countries, with private sector, with academia on what could be a text that will have the main principles on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And slowly, there was a discussion, there was an intergovernmental negotiation. It took time, 18 months. And in 2021, we adopted the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. Please go and check it out. It's online, and it has the main principles on this issue. We're now going to the next one, which would be the one on neurotechnology, and we hope to start work on this in the coming months. Second, is he saying something or? Did I speak too much?
Take a break, and then we take a question.
We come back? Okay. So, break now?
So thank you very much indeed, Kassianides-san, for your informative and enlightening speech. And Kassianides-san gave us a big picture of UNESCO's operations, worldwide operations in scientific and educational and cultural fields. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I propose we take a break, and we are going to move on Q&A. So we restart our activities at 3:05. 3:05. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, back to the conversation. So we take a question. So a student needs to feel free to ask a question, and either in English or in Japanese. Sorry, anyone? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for your today's presentation, and I want to ask you more about ethics of AI. This story really interesting to me. So please tell me about ethics of AI.
Sure. So, as I said, the issue on ethics of AI was that how to have some principles about the necessity to have transparency in the confection of algorithms, for instance, this kind of principles. And one of the issues, and that's why multilateralism is so important, is that, of course, in France, maybe in Japan, in Europe, we can agree very easily on what are the principles and what should be applied. But for different reasons, when you want to have also China or Africa for other reasons, things become more complicated. And that's the whole value of this process that we had at UNESCO, is that we had China, Russia, African countries who were participating in this. So the principles that were adopted allow to have and have a global impact. So there was also two parts. There was also some competence building and capacity building. So because now we had the great achievement to have the recommendation adopted, so every member state, okay. But now we are at the moment of implementing, which is the most important. So what does that mean? It means that every 5 years, every country needs to do a report on its implementation of the recommendation. So this will allow reporting, monitoring of the situation, and it's compulsory. So they have to do a report. Of course, what they write in the report is their responsibility, but everybody will see it. So, you know, every country that I mentioned will have to have a report. And the other part is capacity building, which is that some countries decide to give some money for other countries who don't have the means to be able to have the capacity, the expertise to have the AI developments following these principles. So it's a very positive circle, a very virtuous circle that we try to put in place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So you talked about the education at the beginning of the speech, and 50% of the foundation are for education supporting system, which is noble. And so what exactly the education that those children were supported is taking? Could you tell me that? What exactly, what kind of education it is? Like there are several kinds of education, like education of collectivism, education of, well, individualism, and democratic education, and authoritarian education. So what kind of education, I mean, you're supporting now?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because of course we can say education is good and we need to have everybody needs to have education, but sometimes education can be bringing towards the bad things. Absolutely. So it's a good question. Our difficulty is that we are a multilateral organization. So education, of course, it's the countries that will do education, and somehow we will not tell Japan, you don't put this and this in the curricula. It's the decision and responsibility of the member states. But what we do is basically on giving some advice that some issues be part of the curricula. I will give you two main examples. The first one is called education for peace. Okay, so or citizenship education. So this citizenship education is made out of a few principles: fight against discrimination, defense of peace, these kind of things that make what we call citizenship education. So this is something that we advise, that we try to have into all the curricula in the world. The second part, which is more and more important now, it's what we call, and Japan is a very, very strong supporter, is called ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, which is we push for the countries to put in the curricula, and really Japan plays a very, very strong role on that, to put education for environment, education to climate change, all of this that is so important to build the new to live in our world. So this is what we try also to do. So and finally, another way, which is not on the content, but I think it influences a lot. We fight a lot for gender equality and gender mainstreaming of education, because gender is not only about having half girls, half guys as students. It's also who's the teacher to be also women, and basically to have the gender issue in all aspects of the educational system. And I think this also changes the type of education. But you are right, it's a very important issue to know what kind of education we are talking about. And I think we try to do it while respecting the national sovereignty of member states.
Yeah, so it's like a specific plan for each country, or well, each nation. Is that so?
Depends. There is a plan for the nations who request it. So,
I see.
Particular in Africa, but for instance, countries like Korea. Now they don't have a specific plan because they don't need it. On the contrary, they give advice to other countries, but they built the development after the Civil War and after the World War and the Civil War on education. And there were plans. The ex-Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, was explaining always that he learned at school on a UNESCO book. So there's no specific plan for every country, but the countries who need it and ask for it, of course, UNESCO is there to help.
So you cannot support this kind of, education in countries that refuse your help.
You can't do anything.
I see.
What can you do? We don't have an army at UNESCO.
That's right. Okay,
we don't have an army. You can pass the messages. You can press. For instance, we were discussing it right now before coming, but Afghanistan, now, they forbid girls from going into schools.
Yeah.
Of course, we do. What we do is that we speak, but for the time being, it didn't change much. But we do. What we can do is we cannot impose on them, but we can express strong condemnation, strong concern on this issue. So it's not true that we can't do anything. We can speak. We can speak up.
But what really UN did in Afghanistan cannot be defined as truly helpful, or meaningful. I think maybe just.
UN is not truly helpful in Afghanistan. That's what you say.
Yeah, I heard many versions of that kind of ideology.
Oh yeah.
Ideology, something. Yeah, right. UN is actually making the situations getting worse in Afghanistan.
Oh really?
Yeah.
How is that?
It's like you give somebody. It's like there's just a bunch of starving people, and you give them food, give them water, but you don't teach them the method to survive, and eventually they will all get dependent on your supportive behavior, and become unable to turn their self into the independent situation, like that.
Too much
Too much
support and too much make that
right.
Understand. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, it's really honored to acknowledge that. Anyway, thank you very much.
I didn't acknowledge. I said I understood your point.
Okay.
But what's very frustrating on Afghanistan is what really asks me a lot of questions is I come back to the first sentence I was mentioning is that we have been educating girls for 20 years, and we did hope that this education of girls and men together for so many years would not allow for what happened to happen again, and it did. So it's true that it raises a lot of questions. It's true.
Okay, further questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your speech today. Personally, I've always had education as my core. When I always think about politics, I always go back to education. So I always resonate with the UN's basic core values and stuff. So I'm so happy to be here and to be able to hear your speech right here. And I wanted to ask a question about the education and its effects on risks of conflict. My core belief is that when there's more access and more good quality of education, so the risk of conflict is much smaller and the world becomes more peace. Just a basic theory of mine. And I wanted to ask you what you think is the most important in regards to education on conflict. Is it you think it's more important that we focus on making sure that every single person have access to at least fundamental education, or is the importance more on the quality of education, like he mentioned in his question? Is it about the content of education? Is it about what we teach and that the ethics of the education itself, or is it the inequality and having balance within the country so that there aren't people that are being left and there aren't that much of a difference that affects. When I say conflict, I don't just necessarily wars or terrorism or whatever that drives people to go into that violent action that ends up having innocent people die and everything. And on top of that, I'm also curious to know, because it's not just having just education doesn't directly make the world a better place. I'm sure that there's other situations that are involved, like economic situation, political situation within that country at that time. But for countries that are in a similar situation, let's say especially in the developing countries, what is something that really affects what I call peace, or the situation of peace in that country? So what's the most important thing, and what makes other countries different when they have similar access or levels of education?
Thank you. I'm smiling because the questions are so good that they're almost impossible to answer. But I don't know. They are questions I'm struggling with every day, because there's no easy answer to that. I mean, we were mentioning Afghanistan right now. I mean, for 20 years, we've been having girls at schools. We thought things like that would not happen again, and it's just happening. I mean, the classical example is Nazi Germany. It was the most maybe advanced society in terms of culture and somehow education, and still what happened. So, I mean, we have to be modest. And as you said, there are other factors that enter into play. But I think that overall, both a basic education that is the largest possible, as well as, of course, a quality education are key components to create. I mean, first of all, it's obvious that if you have two societies at the same level and one puts more effort into education, this society will develop better economically. So when a society is better developed economically, then you have less conflict, both internal conflict and with outside, that's for sure. So only the economic argument is already quite strong. Then there is the content. The content is also very, very important, of course. But I think the main issue is about, as I had said during the speech, is like it's first of all a fundamental right. So it's a matter of justice, equality, and respect of human rights to have basic education given to everybody, men, women, at all also moments of life. That's pretty important. Then it's also the economic growth. So these two factors, I think, go together, and we have to take them together. Then what makes the difference for one country to work or not? I think it's really what collective will there is. We very often corruption does not allow to have the development that we would want. I think a public sector, at least at the beginning of the growth, a public education that is strong is very important. Then when the country is developed, maybe things can open up differently. But that's also pretty important, just to ensure equality and having the largest basis. But what I'm telling you is a general answer from what I believe. But I'm not telling you that's the right answer, because these questions that you raised are very, very difficult to answer. I don't think anybody in the world has the answers to that.
I think I'm so happy I can hear this from you, because I feel like there's not much of an importance put on the effect of education on conflict. Like I said, that's my core belief, but I don't see like so many journals or any classes, or I looked all over Japan, but there's no courses that talks about that. So it's so interesting for me to hear from a person that's already in that field. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry to add, one thing is that one problem we have is that we know that the authorities in the country should put a certain percentage of GDP on the education to be efficient and to have it work. And what we see at the same time is that every president that we receive would say, yes, education, I'm all for education, it has to be education. But then when the decisions have to be made in the budget between different fields, not to mention which fields, then it always goes more to other fields, and education is very often, not always, but most often kept aside. So that's financing of education is also a crucial issue.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. No one else? Yeah?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your speech. As long as I looked up on the internet, many executives or directors of UNESCO are from the European countries. And if you ask me in terms of the cultural diversity, as you mentioned in the speech, the people from various continents or the countries should get the higher position. Do you have any opinion of that? Okay.
I didn't. The last point.
If you ask me, people from various continents or countries, should get the higher position of the international institution.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But your assumption is wrong. UNESCO has had from all continents. Last one, the Asian one was a Japanese, Mr. Matsura. Then the one from Eastern Europe, Bokova. Before it was an African. First one was a Latino American, I think. So I think it's not accurate for UNESCO. The only let's say, regional group that didn't have for the time being is the Arab group. So maybe they will be the next ones. But I agree with you, but it's not accurate for UNESCO.
Yeah, like I thought like more than 50% of the executives was the European.
I don't think so. And mine is from Moroccan origin. So does it count? And I think you're right. I mean, seriously, to answer the question seriously, I think it's important to have a representation for it's the UN, so it has to be representing all the countries, and the quality of the persons are also equally important. So yeah, you're right. But I think UNESCO is pretty much okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, so time is running out. So let me ask a question, so a conclusive question.
We had one since the beginning.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for your wonderful speeches. Can I ask you about a bit more personal question about you, sir?
Sure.
When I was a bit younger, one of my goals was to work at the UN or some kind of organization to work for people. But so I wrote speeches or did some kind of public speakings as I was a Japanese representative for the speech contest. But the more I thought about other people's problems, the more confused I got, because trying to solve other people's problem from a far place is really hard. Then I stopped thinking about it, or I stopped writing speeches. So my question is, how do you keep motivated about thinking about the world? Or you mentioned that the problem with Afghanistan was too frustrating. But so how do you always keep motivated about it?
No, that's a great question too. Thank you about that. Well, I mean, at the same time, you need to be. You're not stupid or a dreamer, so you have to see that sometimes it's difficult. We were mentioning Afghanistan, and things are not going on the right direction, and it's sad, and people are dying, and people are. I mean, well, I see that every day because that's my job, including going to these kind of places. So the world is not like fantastic and all good, but at the same time, it's about what you do in life. I mean, in life, if you want to, either you decide to do something that will have some impact, positive impact on the world, and that can be at different levels. And I guess that's what I wanted to do. And in this case, you try your best, and there are some positive things that you can see. So you have some rewards. I was mentioning Mosul. I mean, I went there, and it was like, I'm going to answer on a personal note. I went there, and the city was destroyed. I mean, it was still smelling of human death, really, literally. You could see the dolls of the children under the rubble, and it was terrible. And I go back now, and we are the mosque and the houses are rebuilt, and we did that. So that's just a concrete example to say that yes, what you do matters. I mean, you don't. If you think you will change the whole world and everything will be perfect, then you will be disappointed. But yeah, you can change pretty many things in life. So yeah, that's I think how I keep on going. And that's why also I come to speak to you guys, because you will be the ones doing the rest. So yeah, I think we cannot give up on anything.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I wish we could continue, because the time is running out. So in concluding, a bunch of flowers will be given with a few words by our Dean, Sueda Sensei.
On behalf of
On behalf of School of International Politics, Economics and Communication, I would like to express my deep appreciation to your wonderful speech, Mr. Kassianides.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thanks again for your wonderful speech and response.
Thank you very much. Thank you.